We began as a vision. We've become so much more. Today, from Yorkshire and London, the British Library cares for a living, breathing collection that grows every day, just like the knowledge it fuels. From scientists to novelists, from family historians to students, we've answered thousands of questions.
And helped me to finish my thesis.
We look after the UK's culture and heritage, both physical and digital, curating and preserving for future generations. We are the gateway to a world of wonder.
Hands on the bridge feel the rhythm of the train. Hands on the window feel the rhythm of the rain.
Where young minds are lit up and
anyone can join in.
Hands on your heart feel the rhythm inside. Hands on the rhythm.
all across the UK, with the help of our library partners, we ignite imaginations and help new businesses to grow. We are international. The relationships we've built pave the way for the innovations of tomorrow. Our events and exhibitions inspire new discoveries and spark conversations. We are everyone's library, and together we're just getting started. British Library. Knowledge matters.
Good evening, everybody. Hello, my name's Jamie Andrews. I'm Director of Public Engagement here at the British Library. And to those of you with us in the theatre, to those of you watching us online, in this, our 50th birthday year, as we've just seen, you are all very welcome to the 2023 PEN Pinter Prize. Those of you who are regulars at these PEN Pinters will know that we've hosted these awards here at the British Library since 2009, when they began, when they were founded by our good friends at English PEN in honour of the great writer and playwright Harold Pinter, who himself, of course, was also a former Vice President of English PEN and a great champion of English PEN. As ever, as always, we're just so proud to be associated with a prize that honours the memory of Harold Pinter. I think many of you will know, we hold Harold's archive here at the British Library. It's thousands upon thousands of documents, all of them available to everyone, to anyone, to read, to study, to be inspired by here in our reading rooms. And amongst those thousands of documents, there's handwritten notes and drafts that became Harold's famous Nobel speech, which of course inspires the spirit of this prize, which is awarded every year to a writer in the words directly taken from that speech, a writer that casts an unflinching, unswerving gaze upon the world and shows a fierce intellectual determination to define the real truth of our lives and our societies. Now, the prize every year is shared with a writer of courage, a writer who is active in defence of freedom of expression, often at great risk to their own safety and liberty. And this co-winner is selected by Michael Rosen from a short list of international cases supported by English PEN, and we'll announce the winner of the Writer of Courage later tonight. Please stay around afterwards as well. Books signed by Michael will be available to buy at the shop. Now, in a moment, we'll hear the encomium for this year's winner, Michael Rosen. And I wouldn't normally, in my welcome, intrude upon that tribute. But I can't not, this time, just take a minute to acknowledge all that Michael has done for us at the British Library. I know you'll have spotted Michael there on the reel that we saw earlier, which I have to say was filmed before we knew about the PEN Pinter Prize. But I think that coincidentally, but also rather beautifully, it just makes the point and shows how much, Michael, you're part of the life of this library, just as we know you are part of the lives of so many libraries across the country. Absolutely. Just this Saturday, Michael was here, literally here on this stage in this building at our family day, our book adventurers family day. And it's always such a joy, and it was a joy then to see at first hand, yet again, just how excited and delighted the young and not so young attendees were to see you in action, Michael. And the queues of all the little ones queuing up outside this room to say hello to you afterwards was really quite special. So, family days, school programmes, our Discovering Children's Books online resources. Michael, you are a massively generous supporter of the library's learning programmes, and I know that all my colleagues in the learning team are just delighted, really over the moon that we have this opportunity to honour your work tonight. So, with all that said, and hoping I haven't trodden too much on the toes of our next speaker, to really get going tonight, it gives me great pleasure to welcome onto the stage Helen Weinstein, who is the creative director of History Works, a friend of Michael, and who's going to give the encomium. Helen.
Good evening, everybody. It is a great honour and a pleasure to be invited to speak on this momentous occasion to congratulate Michael Rosen for winning this prestigious award, the 2023 PEN Pinter Prize, awarded to Michael not only for his significant body of work of outstanding literary merit, but also for his writing that, in the words of Harold Pinter's Nobel speech, does really cast an unflinching, unswerving gaze upon the world. And in my encomium, I want to really elaborate on that. I have personal experience of Michael's tenacious and fearless writing and his invaluable gift for addressing the most serious matters of life in a spirit of humour and hope and humanity. We actually met 30 years ago when we were both making radio programmes in the department called Documentaries and Features, located on the top floor of Old BH, BBC's broadcasting house. Our first conversation, which I remember well, Michael zoomed in on the fact that I'm a historian, and we found out that we share a passion to understand big events in the past through the lens of how they were experienced by ordinary people, history from below. In recent years, I've been working with Michael in schools and communities tackling the difficult subject of the Holocaust and discussing the impact of war and displacement, racism and prejudice, the issue that we're all dealing with around the globe today of refugees and migrants. Michael has this amazing ability to address these most serious subjects, to tackle the enormity of the Holocaust and genocides, the plight of refugees and migrants, in a way that is approachable for really young people. And Michael's unflinching approach to the Holocaust has engaged youngsters in a very difficult subject. He just draws them in his research about his own family story of his disappeared uncles who had been displaced and made to wear the yellow star, and then were deported from France and murdered by the Nazis at Auschwitz. It's a shocking story, but it's the way that Michael approaches the storytelling with young people. It's digestible, it's doable. So over the past decade, Michael has actually inspired over 20,000 children attending our programme of workshops, and they all write poems and songs, performing interpretive dramas and dances, reflecting what they've learnt and discussed with us. And we've shared these performances at civic events, at concerts and fundraisers, indeed to commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day itself. Also, in our work for Refugee Week, we talk about refugees and the migrant experience. We meet refugees and migrants that we bring into schools. Michael helps young people to express their empathy by imagining that they are walking in the shoes of refugees, giving them courage by his example when he performs his powerful stories and poems like Everyone Comes From Somewhere. And through his work, Michael explicitly shares with young people how members of his family have been refugees, how he feels that he is a part of a refugee family still, so that when he looks at a refugee, he thinks, I'm part of their family, and they are part of my family. Not because I'm a refugee now, but in a way there is a family of people in the world who looked for refuge and other people who've given refuge, so I feel part of that. This solidarity, said with blunt integrity, is not something young people often hear firsthand from their role models, which is why Michael is so deserving of this prize for his unswerving gaze on humanity. I'm very proud of the books and films that have come out of this work. There is a factual book called The Missing, which Michael wrote about his journey to find out what happened to his family members who were murdered in the Holocaust, and an imagined correspondence between two young cousins in Please Write Home. Also, Michael's brilliant book of poetry, stunningly illustrated by Quentin Blake, On the Move, Poetry About Migration. So not only has Michael had these 3 books published from this work, but we've also made a very successful film series to support schools, which has seen tens of thousands of youngsters learn about the Holocaust and poetry writing from Michael online. Quite a feat. Michael's impact on the next generation is really significant, therefore, because he's showing by example in his poetry and prose how to communicate with courage and with hope. Now, you all know that Michael's excellent and varied body of work has won numerous awards through his ongoing illustrious career. And although Michael is fearless in writing and voicing what bothers him personally and politically, he is now described most often than not in the national newspapers these days as a national treasure. So, looking at Michael's amazing body of work, I am more than happy to endorse this sentiment. Michael, you are treasured, you're much loved, you're much needed, and you're much appreciated. Because we almost lost you during the COVID pandemic, but you survived. And you lived to write about your experiences and to publicise how the doctors and nurses experienced carnage on their wards, and the wards that you were on. And they were not themselves allowed to speak about this carnage, about the unpreparedness for the pandemic. But as a patient, you were. You've published outstanding and moving books about you and your family's COVID experience, many different kinds of love and getting better, and the quirky volume of poems about brain scans and eye tests and toes and toenails called The Advantages of Nearly Dying, and a book for the young about learning to walk again with Sticky McStickstick. It is indeed in these recent works about your COVID experiences that, Michael, you show us again your ability to address the most serious matters of life and death, suffering and sadness, in a spirit of joy, of humour and hope, fearless in holding power to account. Michael, your poetry and novels, storybooks and journalism, radio programmes and films have reached millions of adults now, youngsters and children too, here in the UK and in so many parts of the world. In broadcasts for radio and TV, and on your film channel, in your writing and performances for children and adults, you share your huge sense of fun with words. And it is just the sheer joy of wordplay that comes across not only on the page, but in your exploration and your curiosity of words, which you have generously shared with all of us in the long-running series for BBC Radio 4. I'm an avid listener of this, Word of Mouth, which explores the English language and the ways we use it, which now has over 250 episodes that have been made and available online. As most of you here will know, Michael has previously been acknowledged as one of our most imaginative writers for the young. Earlier awarded the role of Children's Laureate, and brilliantly, Michael used this role to show his commitment to humour and his wanting to support fellow writers to provide hope and optimism and joy, setting up the Children's Funny Prize, which gives awards to the funniest children's books of the year. Writing books for children is where Michael has proved to reach way beyond the UK, to be one of our most significantly contemporary poets internationally, with, for example, We're Going on a Bear Hunt and Chocolate Cake, known by generations of youngsters globally now, not only through the printed word, but now learnt from Michael's poetry films, where children mimic Michael's intonations and actions, rhythms and rhymes, learnt from his exuberant performances on film. Memes of Michael are even popular in China, where he is celebrated as Nice Grandpa. This way of writing and performing for adults and children, which reflects our imaginative and everyday worlds, is ultimately, I think, a very successful subversion, when you said an intervention, of the lifeless way children's literacy is often taught in schools. And we need to praise Michael for that very much too. In conclusion, Michael has shown a huge commitment to entertaining and enlightening all of us with his values of social justice, of walking in the shoes of others, showing a fierce intellectual determination to define the real truth of our lives and our societies, which you all know is what the PEN Pinter Prize was founded to recognise. Thank you, Michael, for giving us this amazing body of work with your stunning feats of wordplay and humour, which support and uplift all of us, giving us optimism and hope and joy. It is now my pleasure to welcome to the stage Children's Laureate Joseph Coelho, who has written a poem in honour of Michael for this special occasion. And joining him on stage are our esteemed guests from Argyle Primary School. Thank you.
Wow, what a wonderful opportunity. Michael's poems have been with me since childhood. I have very fond memories of reading Michael's poems when I was a kid, all those weeks ago. I've had the huge privilege of sharing a stage with Michael on a few occasions and seeing the response of young people. I've also heard from other authors who have had the same opportunities of sharing the stage with Michael and saying, have you done an event with Michael? Poetry rock star. Oh my goodness, the reactions of the children. And so those experiences have inspired this poem. And I'm so excited to be reading this poem with these fantastic students today.
1, 2, 3. Rosen by Joseph Coelho.
Voices rise up out of the auditorium. The children are hungry for poems.
Is he here yet? Have you seen him? Do you think he's coming?
The drooling children know there will be poems today. But who will be reading?
I hope it's him. I saw him on YouTube. My dad met him. He visited my mum's school.
The children show off their stories of the first poem they heard.
The one about the cake. The one about the dog. The one that was too hot. I like how he performs. I like how his poems are like life. I like how his poems mean something.
The auditorium lights start to fade.
Are you sure he's coming? I heard he's coming. He must be coming.
The adults that were standing, necks craning, failing to hide their childlike excitement, begin to sit, feeling the weight of adult bones once again. His arrival is signalled by a wave, a tingling, a collective outpouring of held breath, a rush of...
It's him! He's here! Look over there!
Smiles and eyes alight on adult and child alike as he rhymes up onto the stage.
The haikus of his eyebrows wiggle, and the audience are bound up in poetry, travelling through time on the meter of his memories.
The limerick of his mouth grins, and the audience are sharing a meal at his table on the rhythm of his recollections.
The balance of his leg bound him across the stage as giggles and laughter wash through the theatre.
The anthologies of his eyes hold them all, through the laughter and the thoughts, through the ponderous delights, through the gasps and the tears.
It's him!
Whisper the children.
It's him!
Breathe the teachers.
It's him!
Mouth the parents.
He's him!
Say all, remembering the poems that will thrum within them forever.
It's Michael Rosen! It's Michael Rosen!
It's Michael Rosen! It's now my pleasure to now hand over to author and founder of the PEN Pinter Prize, Lady Antonia Fraser, to present Michael Rosen with the 2023 award, and as is tradition, a special piece from writer and cartoonist Martin Rosen.
It's lovely sitting next to a national treasure. I strongly recommend it.
Thank you very much.
It's really an honour, and it's an honour. I'm representing Harold Pinter, and it's an honour, and Harold would be so delighted. Really, he would.
was
You
lovely
stand
to know
for
him very
everything.
briefly.
Well,
Yes,
he
it was
would.
lovely to
And
know.
good luck.
Thank you,
Thank
Lady
you.
Antonia. Thank you very much.
We'll pop
Go on then.
Yep,
Yeah.
we will.
Good.
Thank you very, very much, Joe Coelho. Thank you very much, Coelho, I should say. Thank you very much, Argyle Primary. And thank you, of course, Helen, for that wonderful speech. Thank you very much. I must try and live up to that. But I must begin, actually, by giving huge thanks to the writer and founder of the PEN Pinter Prize, Lady Antonia Fraser, also to Daniel Gorman, Director of English PEN, and the judges of this year's prize, poet, educator and writer Raymond Antrobus. Are you here, Ray? No, maybe not. Writer, just checking, writer and director of the international touring theatre company Complicité, Amber Massey Blomfeld. Are you here? Ray, yes. And the chair of the English PEN, Ruth Borthwick. Yes, you're here as well. Hooray. I've known of the award since its inauguration, and I have to say it had never crossed my mind that the work I do would ever be regarded as worthy for this honour. Lucky I wasn't a judge then. Well, no, it's me standing here. It wouldn't have been. No, anyway. I'll try not to be overwhelmed by the company I'm keeping here, previous winners, and of course, Harold Pinter himself, who we must thank for having created the prize. Can I spend just a few moments talking about Harold Pinter? He was innovative, daring, outspoken, and brave. I first came across his work when I was a teenager, going along to the Questors Theatre in Ealing as part of being in the Young Questors Club. This was December 1959. I was 13, and I sat on my own in the theatre, which was an old converted church, watching a matinee of The Birthday Party. You must remember that Pinter was a new voice in the theatre at this time. The word Pinteresque hadn't been invented. Not quite. The Oxford English Dictionary gives its first appearance as being a year later. So there I am on my own in a drafty old church watching this play with a mix of amazement, horror, and mystery. The words being spoken, were they real, ironic, or were they, in effect, what I might call shadow words? The words that people would speak if they dared or could or would speak them. And there's the word, dared. Even as a 13-year-old, I had a sense that there was something daring about a play that revealed what people secretly thought, desired, and feared. And for those of you who know the play, you'll know that it conjures up the image of arbitrary menace, control, and punishment. When asked about the play 30 years later, Pinter said, "The character of the old man Petey says one of the most important lines I've ever written. As Stanley is taken away, Petey says, "Stan, don't let them tell you what to do." Pinter goes on, "I've lived that line all my damn life. Never more than now." And then talking about 3 of his plays, Pinter added, "It's the destruction of an individual, the independent voice of an individual. I believe that is precisely what the United States is doing in Nicaragua." The critic, Michael Billington, wrote of The Birthday Party, "It's a deeply political play about the individual's imperative need for resistance." Now, even though I've written screeds about the matter, I don't fully know what we mean when we say a play, a film, a poem, any work of art has an effect on us. Even so, I'm pretty sure something was cooking in 13-year-old Rosen's head, watching The Birthday Party, and some of that was to do with Harold Pinter's conscious or unconscious mind. Do you see where I'm going with this? Writing is often, but not always, very individualistic. Being a reader, a viewer, or even a theatre-goer can be individual at the very moment of reception. The thing that is written, play, poem, novel, might be about individuals, but both Pinter and Billington were keen to locate that individualism in something social, political, and in Pinter's case, something to do with resistance. I can honestly say that I've struggled with this for most of my writing life. Let me put my cards on the table. There's a lot about the world I live in, we live in, the world that my contemporaries have created that I find profoundly unsatisfactory, unfair, or utterly horrifying. As the PEN Pinter Prize records, all over the world, there are people being silenced, incarcerated, persecuted, and killed. The world is unjustly, absurdly, grotesquely unequal. And incredibly, after hundreds of years of this unjust, absurd, grotesque inequality, it hasn't got any better. If anything, it's got worse. The twin powers of exploitation and oppression seem to be as strong, if not stronger, than they've ever been. As I speak, there are several terrible wars going on in which civilians are being killed in their thousands, or is it tens of thousands? In the midst of this, I write. I look around the room, the previous winners, the judges, many of you, perhaps most of you, write too. I know that many of us hover over our bits of paper and keyboards, wondering whether what we do makes any difference whatsoever to the wicked way of the world. Or we might wonder, should it? A few years after I was sitting in that church watching The Birthday Party, I read Jean-Paul Sartre's What is Literature? Sartre, as you may know, is a hard taskmaster, demanding of us in the Republic of Letters to be committed, engagé. I confess I did wonder at the time, but Jean-Paul, what about jokes? Sometimes they're important and necessary too, aren't they? But don't let me get distracted. Let me stay with this concern with writers writing on their own about individuals while being perturbed, worried, or like Pinter, furious with the socio-political torments. What did Michael Billington mean when he said The Birthday Party was deeply political? Ah, yes, he located it in the individual's imperative need for resistance. So let me tease this out a bit. Are both Pinter and Billington saying that through these spectacles we create in writing, it's possible to show unjust power or plain injustice in such a way as to invite readers and watchers to feel a need to resist? The first winner of this prize was Tony Harrison. Many of you here will know his poems and plays. In one poem, he focuses on just one word, a word that I say as us, but one that he, as a boy, pronounced us. As a boy at Leeds Grammar School, this was noted and commented on. Socially aspirant Leeds Grammar School boys of the 1940s and 50s weren't supposed to say us. It's as if we are looking through a keyhole, or an even smaller chink or crack than that, into the workings of social class, regionalism, oppression, by looking at the use of one word, or in the words of modern linguists, at the level of the signifier. Despite my doubts as to whether I merit it, I have accepted this award, nay, been delighted to accept it, if a little overawed by it. I'm no Harold Pinter, no Tony Harrison. Both of them, I think, overcame that problem of how to foster a social reaction, social resistance even, through individualistic forms. So, can I put it like this? I think this award throws me a challenge It invites me to ask myself, what have you done, Rosen, to make you think you can accept this award? By the way, saying Rosen like that to myself conjures up streams of grammar school teachers from the 1950s and 60s. I think I can hear my brother laughing. From the benign to the boring, from the encouraging to the crushing, many of them full of the contradictions that stay with you for the rest of your life. For example, imagine this. One teacher once said to me, "If we had any sense, Rosen, we would have been on the side of the Germans in the Second World War." Not the most tactful thing to say to a Jewish kid in the 1950s. However, he was the very same teacher who said as I left that school, "Don't get rubbed out, will you, Rosen?" Another voice echoing in my head as I say Rosen to myself is that of Christopher Hitchens. For some reason, he always called me Rosen. Perhaps not the Hitchens many of you knew from TV, but the earlier version, we all have one of them, who I knew at university. That Hitchens was, I guess, a pub Jean-Paul Sartre. While I drank my orange juice mixed with sparkling water, eating roll mops, Hitchens spent many hours telling me how I ought to sharpen up my act and spend less time pissing about. Well, I say to the late Christopher Hitchens, I like doing both. And to tell the truth, I rate both. In fact, to complicate matters, sometimes I sharpen up my pissing about. As Shakespeare suggests with the character of the fool in King Lear, there are times when absurdism is a legitimate answer to hate and cruelty. So yes, Jean-Paul, yes, Hitchens, there have been times when I've been polemical. This may have come out that way because matters seem to be so pressing, or that Michael Gove was running education. So pressing that you couldn't have stopped me. At other times, it's because people have asked me. For 10 years or so, The Guardian asked me to write about education from the point of view of a curious parent. In fact, more often than not, it was as a furious parent. Only a couple of weeks ago, we read in The Guardian's sister paper that people who speak out against the government's education policies have been noted, documented, and cancelled. What is it about education that seems to invite people at the top to be so totalitarian, even as they insist that education is one of the duties and virtues of democracy? Anyone might think that right-wing libertarianism imposes limits on its libertarianism. Surely not. Unless I've misunderstood him, I think Sartre rather thought that poetry had its place alongside music and so didn't have to obey his demands for commitment. His gaze was fixed on prose writing. By the way, to even things up, as regards teachers, a big shout out for my A-level French teachers, Mr. and Mrs. Emmons, who taught me Jean-Paul Sartre, Les Mains Sales, and Voltaire's Candide. Isn't it interesting how preparing a talk like this starts to throw up connections and disruptions? The birthday party, Tony Harrison, Voltaire, King Lear, and Michael Gove. Another pressure on my writing, a welcome one, has indeed come from Professor Helen Weinstein, as you heard. Yes, pressures and needs, we could say a lot about that aspect of writing. We often focus on what we call influence, in the sense of artistic precursors, and not so much on the social circumstances that create pressure, need, and indeed necessity. What were the pressures that came to bear on Pinter that led him to write The Birthday Party? What hidden forces lay behind the two men who take Stanley away at the end of the play? Less mysterious, perhaps, but no less potent, are the ones expressed through the fault lines in Tony Harrison's poem, Uz. But again, fixing that gaze on what I've been on about, I come to a good deal of work that slots into the category we call children's literature. I fell into it by mistake. In my late teens and early 20s, I experimented with writing in a voice that was meant to be something like my own from when I was about 10. For some reason that I'm not fully conscious of, I wanted to be an archaeologist of my childhood, and the most suitable form seemed to me then, and still is, a kind of oral writing, a spoken word narrative, a form of memorable speech, a kind of free verse monologue. Alongside these, I inherited the wordplay and nonsense of Lewis Carroll, Edward Lear, and Spike Milligan, which were in a way the unconscious wordplay that 10-year-old me liked or would have liked. Thanks to the BBC Schools radio producer Joan Griffiths, the great educator Margaret Meek Spencer, and the editor Pam Royds, I was discovered and reframed as a writer for children. And I've been doing this for 60 years. That sentence has an exclamation mark on it. And what a far cry this is from all that Pinteresque Sartrean stuff. Or is it? Let me put it this way. If as an adult you imagine the world as a 10-year-old might see it, or the way that you saw it when you were 10, it may not be the most subversive thing in the known world, but it sure does bring you up against many of the strange power trips that we as adults go in for, or much worse. Right up until this week, I am delighted and amazed to stand in front of 200, 500, on occasions 1,500 children relating stories that happened to me when I was a child in the 1950s in North London to school students and children living lives that are in many ways eons away from mine. I'm very lucky. Right from 1974, when my first book came out, teachers, librarians, and teacher trainers have asked me to read and perform my poems, even as I'm relating the grossly hyperbolic saga of the teacher who wouldn't let us breathe in her lessons and who strung us up on the wall bars in the school prison for 3 weeks with the rats nibbling our toenails. You'll note here that I always believe in telling children the truth. What's the laughter doing when I perform this stuff? Is it what the great Russian critic Mikhail Bakhtin called subversive laughter and the carnivalesque? Bakhtin answers my plea to Sartre, what about jokes? He asked, what happens when we writers turn the world upside down? That's what my precursor, Mallory Blackman, did with her wonderful Noughts and Crosses series, inviting us to see the world we know through a new inverting prism, and so made us see the oppression in the known world. And that nonsense and wordplay stuff. Well, remember what I said about the signifier, the words, the signs we make in order to express meaning. I say to children, for example, I've got a new way to spell the word everybody. You take one letter at a time off the front of the word, and you say what you got left. And you get everybody, verybody, everybody, rybody, whybody, body, oddy, die, why? Or if you put it together a little bit more quickly, everybody, verybody, everybody, rybody, whybody, body, oddy, die, why? So, is this a disruption at the level of the signifier? By the way, one of the great mysteries about Lewis Carroll is that he created some of the most disruptive writing ever, but was himself a desperately conformist person. Not that we have to bother too much about that. I mean, apart from the fun of being nosy, don't we say, let the work stand for itself? Well, the fun of being nosy is such a lot of fun, not many of us stick to that principle. I remember the great subversive poet Adrian Mitchell ticking me off once because I said that I liked the Daniel Craig Gwyneth Paltrow movie about Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath. On a nighttime car journey, he cried out to me, "Leave them alone!" Well, in the nicest possible way, you haven't left me alone. Thanks very much indeed. Finally, a brief word about COVID. Well, it's needs and pressures again, isn't it? You may have noticed that there is an inquiry going on. I don't know how long it'll take. I hope it'll tell us what happened. I hope it'll help us do things better next time. But I couldn't wait. I did my own inquiry. Well, that's partly, or perhaps mostly, what writing is. It inquires, investigates, interprets, unearths. It goes somewhere, inside our heads or outside, and reports back. When something as immense and awful as the pandemic was, I wanted to be a witness. Because I couldn't wait, I've been my own statutory inquiry. Before I go, I must thank some people who've nurtured and supported me. My parents and brother were, and in my brother's case still is, amongst the greatest questioners, jokers, probers, wordsmiths I have ever known. My children have done their best to bring me up. They found it to be quite a hard job. Emma took up the pieces of a fragmented person back in 2000 and has done the best she could with challenging material. Me. Talking of challenging circumstances, it wasn't my intention to lumber her and the family with 48 days in intensive care. Her solid stoicism, down-to-earth realism is a wonder. And that reminds me of all those people in the NHS, striving to mend and cure people. in spite of what looked like efforts to hinder them through cuts and privatisation. The people who looked after me, men and women, many of them with origins from all over the world, working together for the good of humankind, offered a glimpse of something of how we could live, if we had the resolve and solidarity to make it happen. Now, each year, the PEN Pinter Prize is shared with a writer of courage, who's chosen by the winner from a shortlist of PEN's current cases of concern. This half of the prize is awarded to someone who's been persecuted for speaking out about their beliefs. This year's winner is an acclaimed academic, anthropologist, and a leading expert on Uyghur folklore and cultural traditions, recognized internationally for her unique contribution to the study and cataloguing of Uyghur cultural heritage. She disappeared in late 2017, shortly after making plans to travel to Beijing to participate in an academic conference. She never reached her destination, and it was widely believed that she had been disappeared by the Chinese authorities. Despite international condemnation of her disappearance and a campaign calling for her release, more than 3 years passed before reports confirmed that the Chinese authorities had sentenced and imprisoned her. Last month, it was widely reported that a sentence of life imprisonment on charges of endangering state security by promoting splitism, originally handed down in 2018, has now been upheld. 6 years since she first disappeared, she continues to be held incommunicado, and her whereabouts remain unknown. Standing here in the British Library, I could not be more aware of the huge gulf between the kind of freedoms I have, or often take for granted, but are denied to many others in the world. I've devoted many hours in my life to the enjoyment and study of folklore, story and song in particular, trying to understand the values, ideas and feelings that these express. I've learnt a huge amount from this and applied it many times over in my life. My version of We're Going on a Bear Hunt came out of this interest. But my passion for what the American poet Carl Sandburg once called, yes, the people, is pushed towards sorrow and anger on hearing that someone could be imprisoned for precisely the kind of interest I have. This is why I have chosen Rahila Dawood to be this year's Writer of Courage. I should note here that I have sometimes moved in circles in my life where people have argued furiously over whether folk music was mired in nostalgia or, as others argued, it was the voice of the exploited, the oppressed and the suppressed. Here with Rahila Dawood, we can see that the Chinese authorities have in effect decided that argument. Simply to record, study and catalogue a people's culture has been and continues to be an act of resistance. I must wish her well, fervently hope that whatever we're doing here today helps her case. I want to express admiration for what she's done, and I wish her all the mental and physical strength she needs, or as my parents would say, shekoyach, a Hebraic Yiddish saying meaning something like a mix of appreciation and wishing strength for someone. Rahila Dawood is among the featured writers in PEN Writes, English PEN's international letter writing campaign. PEN members and supporters are encouraged to send messages of solidarity and hope to her family to let them know that she has not been forgotten. And you can do this by visiting English PEN's website or by scanning the QR code on the screen outside. I'm honoured to now hand over to Rachel Harris, Professor of Ethnomusicology at SOAS University of London and friend of Rahila Dawood. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
I'm really very grateful to English PEN and to Michael Rosen for awarding this honour to my friend and colleague Rahila Dawood. We're going on a bear hunt, of course, was a regular part of our family bedtime story sessions for many years. It's really lovely to reconnect with its author now in a slightly different way, even though my contribution to this evening is not the most joyful part, but we really appreciate the invitation. So, as I'm sure you're all aware, over the past few years, the peoples of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of China, to give it its official name, those peoples have suffered under heavy securitization, mass incarcerations, and attacks on their language, religion, and other aspects of their cultural identity. Since 2017, an estimated 1.5 million people have been arbitrarily detained in a system of political education camps, or concentration camps, as they're also known, and also in prison. Hundreds and thousands of Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims have been given long prison sentences on spurious charges. As part of my own work, which has developed since then, I've been working recently on the police records which were leaked from one particular county. And I've been shocked at how many elderly women have been given 20-year prison sentences for learning to recite the Quran when they were 7 or 8 years old, so 20, 30 years ago. Witnesses and former detainees have testified that people detained in the camps and the prisons are subjected to systematic abuse, to cultural and political indoctrination and forced labor. Outside the detention facilities, everyone else, all the people, are subject to a pervasive system of mass surveillance, controls on their movement, forced sterilization, and family separation. So Rahila Dawood is just one of the millions of people caught up in this repression. So Rahila's research and writing centered on the most distinctive and significant aspect of religious and cultural life in the Uyghur region. That is the holy shrines, the tombs of martyrs and saints, which were popular pilgrimage destinations for Uyghur people. I know this is not a very well understood region. So the Uyghur region, this part of northwest China, was introduced to Islam in the 10th century. It was brought by merchants and missionaries coming from Central Asia and Persia. And throughout the history of Islam in this region, then, a 1,000-year-old history, the Uyghur people, the believers there, have venerated the heroes and heroines of this religious heritage. So the kings who converted, the religious teachers, warriors and martyrs, scholars and mystics. And over the centuries, the tombs of these historical leaders and saints became important sites of pilgrimage, and the larger shrines held big annual festivals to celebrate the saint. And these festivals, in spite of all the extraordinary social and political upheavals of the 20th century, these traditions of pilgrimage were sustained, and the major shrine festivals continued to attract tens of thousands of people until the closure of the last shrine came in 2013. So I first met Rahila back in 1996. At that time, she'd just completed her groundbreaking PhD on Uyghur shrine pilgrimage. She was studying at Beijing's prestigious Nationalities University. And we spent some time back then watching her videos of some of the shrine festivals. It was really extraordinary material of a culture that was virtually undocumented. And we agreed to co-author an article to try and introduce her work to English-speaking audiences. If I may, I'll just read a very short excerpt of that. It's summer 1995, and tens of thousands of people are gathering in the middle of the Taklamakan Desert near Kashgar at the Ordem Padishah shrine. The majority are poor peasants. They come, some from far away, on trucks, on donkey carts, or on foot. The temperature soars to over 40 degrees during this 3-day festival. They come to celebrate and to mourn the saint. Old men come to dance, Young people come to the Ordam to meet each other. Women come to pray to the saint for a child. The sick come to bury themselves in the sand around the site. It's thought to have healing powers. At this Islamic festival, music is everywhere. The Dastanchi sing the tales of the heroes, the Medde tell religious stories, and the Ashik, the religious beggars, sing, accompanying themselves on the sapaya, the percussion sticks. So just a taste of that rich culture. And Rahila carried on over the next 25 years, researching and documenting this rich culture. She published prolifically in Uyghur, in Chinese, and in English. She received numerous grants and awards from Chinese and international funders. She became the director of the Folklore Research Center at Xinjiang University, and she trained a new generation of Uyghur anthropologists. Happily, many of them are now in the West and working in the line that she started. So Rahila gained an international reputation. She was invited as visiting scholar and research partner to several universities in the US and in the UK, including my own institution, SOAS. Rahila was a generous colleague. You can see what a lovely person she was from the photos, right? She was a very generous supervisor. She treated her students like an extended family. In pursuit of her research projects, she led those students and the occasional stray foreign academic on really quite grueling field trips. We faced hostile travel conditions, we slept in impoverished villages, and we got used to Rahila having to explain what on earth we were up to, always with that ready smile and unfailing courtesy to the many suspicious local officials we met on the way. Rahila amassed an unparalleled collection of audio and video recordings of Uyghur shrine festivals, on rare documents on Uyghur religious traditions, and interviews with the people who inherited and transmitted this vibrant culture. One of the projects I'm currently involved with is working on archiving this valuable collection so we can at least document and preserve a record of the culture and make it freely available to future generations. So Rahila got me out of a tight spot more than once. One time we arrived, myself and my family, in July 2009 in the regional capital, Urumqi. This was a couple of days before the forceful suppression of a peaceful demonstration and the subsequent outbreak of terrible interethnic violence in that capital city. We got caught up in that. The local police confiscated our passports and they held on to them until the morning of our return flights, which made me a little anxious. The police said, "Oh, sorry, we've lost the key to the drawer." And it was Rahila who went into the police station with great courage and persuaded them that I was actually an academic studying music and not, in fact, a hostile foreign agent, which, contrary to more recent reports, I am not. I am an academic studying Uyghur music. There was another time she rescued one of her students who was detained when the police found a recording of the Quran on her phone. It was Rahila who went to the police station and persuaded them that her student was not listening to the Quran because she was a religious extremist, but because she was a student of Uyghur folklore, which she was. But in the end, Rahila's ingenuity and persuasiveness couldn't save her. I last saw Rahila in 2016. This was a year before she was detained. We were at a conference that we'd organized in Hong Kong. We sat in a sunny precinct and we drank coffee. It was a rare moment of calm before the gathering storm. She'd already had trouble on her journey from Urumqi to Hong Kong. The plane was diverted due to snow. This was in February. And she and the student had checked into a hotel in Chengdu in southwest China. And they were woken up in their hotel room in the middle of the night by the local police. The hotel had reported them because their ethnicity was marked as Uyghur on their passports, and Uyghurs no longer had the right to travel freely within their own country. Why didn't she run then? This question still echoes around my brain. Wasn't it clear what was going on even then? The authorities were already building the network of concentration camps. They were already rounding up religious people in the south. But why would she feel personally in danger? She was an internationally respected scholar, a professor in the region's top university, and she was leading several government-funded research projects on Uyghur cultural heritage. Now, thanks to the Duihua Foundation, we have confirmation of Rahile's life sentence for splitism, a deliberate attempt to split the Chinese nation. That's the crime that she's been convicted of, splitism. For me, it's clear that her crime is in fact her research, the same painstaking work to document Uyghur heritage that was previously supported by government grants. So Rahila has become quite a powerful symbol of the devastation of Uyghur culture and society. But she is just one individual among many. The Chinese authorities have gone to extraordinary lengths to mask what's been happening in the Uyghur region. But we know of at least 312 documented individual cases of people like her, Uyghur academics, writers, creative artists, who have been detained and imprisoned, specifically because they researched, promoted, transmitted, and created Uyghur culture and history. Over the past 6 years, the sacred shrines that she so lovingly documented have been largely destroyed, bulldozed, literally. And the people who visited them have been detained for re-education in the camps or given long prison sentences on spurious charges of religious extremism. In a 2013 interview, Rahila said, "If one were to remove these shrines, the Uyghur people would lose contact with the earth. They would no longer have a personal, cultural, or spiritual history. After a few years, we would not have a memory of why we live here or where we belong." So this comment, I think, says a lot about Rahila, about why Rahila dedicated her life's work to documenting this culture. And it also explains why she's been imprisoned alongside those who are part of the living culture. And that reason is precisely because the Chinese government intends that Uyghur cultural memory should be erased. So the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, has been explicit in his calls for what he's termed a correct understanding of the history of Xinjiang. And what this means is that history is now being comprehensively rewritten to demonstrate that the Uyghur region and its peoples have actually been an integral part of the Chinese nation since ancient times. Rahila Dawood's research contradicts this distorted view of history, and so she and her work have been disappeared. So since 2021, we've seen determined efforts from Chinese media to suggest that everything is now normal in the Uyghur region. But what we're actually witnessing, I would say, is just a new phase of the campaign of cultural erasure. And we should not forget that hundreds of thousands of people like Rahila remain in prison. So part of this push to rewrite the region's history is through tourism. And over the past few years, we've seen millions of Chinese tourists pouring into the Uyghur region to watch singing and dancing Uyghurs and to visit the tomb of what they call the fragrant concubine. This is an 18th century Uyghur princess who was taken to Beijing as a consort for the Qing emperor. Few of these tourists realize that this tomb is actually part of a sacred shrine dedicated to a dynasty of Sufi rulers of Kashgar, long since suppressed, and formerly an important site of pilgrimage. So today, international travel firms are eagerly promoting tours of Xinjiang to the UK market. I really hope that travelers will pause and think of Rahila Dawood before they join one of these exotic tours. China's actions then in the Uyghur region demonstrably constitute what UNESCO calls strategic cultural cleansing, and yet UNESCO continues to acknowledge China as a protector of Uyghur heritage through its heritage lists. A 2022 report by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights provided detailed documentation of crimes against humanity committed in the Uyghur region. And yet, China has just been voted back onto the UN Human Rights Council. Last month, the UK Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, visited Beijing to begin the process of stabilising relations between our countries. Given the now extensive evidence of crimes against humanity and cultural cleansing in the Uyghur region, international governments, businesses and organisations that express a commitment to human rights need to do more than pay lip service while continuing their business as usual. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Ruth Borthwick, the Chair of English PEN. I'd like to thank Rachel again, and please can we have another round of applause. So thank you, Rachel, for accepting the Writer of Courage Award for Rahila Dawood. I'd just like to reiterate what Michael said earlier. Please, if you want to help Rahila Dawood's case, please can you visit our website and find out how you can help. Everyone in this room can make a difference. And you can also help make a difference by joining English PEN. Of course I'm going to say that because I'm the Chair of Trustees. But the fact is that English PEN needs your support. And you can find out how to support us by going onto our website and reading about the campaigns that we do. If you like what we do, if you want to support us in our work to free writers from persecution all over the world, there are 143 PEN branches around the world. It started here over a century ago. But you can help by joining English PEN, and we would welcome you very warmly. This is the 15th year of the PEN Pinter Prize. I was Chair of Judges, and I'd just like to thank my fellow judges, Ray Antropos and Amber Massey-Blomfield, who did a brilliant job, as is evidenced tonight by the fact that Michael is our choice of writer. There are lots of other people I'd like to thank, of course. Firstly, the British Library for their consistent support of this prize, and we value that highly. Helen Weinstein for her extremely moving praise song of Michael. Joseph Coelho, the Children's Laureate, and those fantastic children from Argyle Primary School. I'm completely overwhelmed by that. Martin Rowson, our inimitable cartoonist, who every year, I don't think you got the chance really to see the cartoon, but the cartoon, as you may know, Harold Pinter was a very keen cricketer and supporter of cricket. And so the cartoon shows the prize winner on the pitch, in this case with a very fierce-looking Harold Pinter as the wicket-keeper. And it's an extraordinary thing that he does every year. And Lisa Ross for their stunning portraits of Rahila, which really brought Rahila to life, I feel. Lady Antonia Fraser, the beating heart of the PEN Pinter Prize. Ruth Maxted for her steadfast support. The Blavatnik Family Foundation for their generous support over many years. Arts Council England and T.S. Eliot Foundation for their core support, and all the many other supporters that make this possible and make English PEN's work extremely efficient and successful, but we've still got a lot to do. I'd also like to thank the amazing English PEN team, in particular for this evening, Kat Lucas and Zoe Sadler. Please, can we have some applause for them? And I'd like to thank you for coming out this evening. It's incredibly important and heartwarming, and I hope that you will take the message about English PEN's work with you. But finally, the evening really belongs to Michael Rosen. I was dying to say nice, so I have said it. It had to be said. Thank you so much, Michael. And please, can you join me in applauding Michael?